This is Fantasy Football Today from CBSSports.com.
Ryan Fitzpatrick, Andy Dalton, Carson Palmer. They are all top 10 quarterbacks after 3 weeks as we welcome you back here to Fantasy Football Today. And let's talk quarterbacks and some tight ends for you to add. So we'll pull up some of the most viewed quarterbacks in CBSSports.com leagues, and those three guys that I mentioned, they're on there, along with Christian Ponder, who Dave likes a lot. Jamie, if you look at this list, what stands out to you? Who do you want to add?
Well, first off, if Matthew Stafford's out this week, Shaun Hill should be the most added quarterback in fantasy leagues because he'll have a great matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. And he actually matched Matthew Stafford in terms of fantasy production in very limited action when he came on for Stafford in that game against Titans. Now, granted, Mr. Titus Young Sr. helped a lot with that, with his Hail Mary catch. But I think you got to look at Ryan Fitzpatrick because he's probably the guy you can have a chance to pick up right now, aside from Christian Ponder, just in terms of ownership. And the way Fitzpatrick is playing, multiple touchdowns all three of his games, and if they don't have their top two running backs, as much as I think Tashard Choice can play a significant role, we saw last year against the Patriots. He had 378 passing yards, 2 touchdowns in that game. He has an opportunity in what could be a shootout against New England this week to help you. And as Dave was talking about, if you don't like Michael Vick this week, I'm not sold on Cam Newton right now with the way he's playing and starting him against the Falcons. Two guys that I would start Ryan Fitzpatrick over this week. And if he's still available out there, I think you should pick him up. As much as that schedule ahead is brutal, the way he's playing right now, you still can figure on him getting some quality production.
Definitely can use him while you can.
Nathan, when you look at that most viewed list, Jake Locker is on there. Are you buying what he did in Week 3, or do you think he's more like what he did in Weeks 1 and 2?
No, I like Jake Locker, and I've liked him all year long. You know, he struggled early. The tough early part of their schedule is the toughest schedule they will face all year. He is going to get better. He's somebody that I would absolutely add right now as a number 2 quarterback. We saw the best of what Jake Locker can bring to the table against Detroit. Now, granted, it was the Lions, but over 370 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and he ran for over 30 yards. He's the team's leading rusher right now, which is another indictment of Chris Johnson. But when you can't run the football, you have to throw it. He dropped back 46 times in that game. They handed the ball off to Chris Johnson, 14. He had 42 pass attempts, 4 rushes, did Jake Locker. So I like him. I think he has a ton of upside. Kenny Britt is back and healthy. You know he loves Nate Washington now. He's caught 2 touchdowns already on the year. They got Jared Cook. They have Kendall Wright. They have good weapons, and they're going to have to throw the football. So Jake Locker, absolutely somebody I would add. And Christian Ponder, as Dave said earlier, a tremendous add. And actually, the next 3 weeks are great because in Week 6 he gets the Washington Redskins, who have allowed a league high 10 passing touchdowns so far in 2012.
I agree with you on Locker, but the one thing about it is those touchdowns were somewhat fluky. Obviously, Nate Washington's catch was amazing, and then Jared Cook with the great breakaway play as well. Does he have to get a little bit more consistent, though, with some of these plays and not having to rely on, even Week 1 with Washington with the great catch that he had, too, against the Patriots?
Yeah, you certainly would like to see that. I think as the season evolves and Kenny Britt gets back into being Kenny Britt, which I think we're very close to. I think he almost had a very big game against Detroit there. This is just an offense with a lot of weapons, and Jake Locker is going to take advantage of that. I like him. Right now, he's somebody that I would add to sit on the bench. I wouldn't want to start him necessarily this week. I think he'll have a very tough matchup with Houston. I would sit him this week. But I think as the season progresses, he has the opportunity to have a lot of bonanza-type games with his run-pass ability.
I think we should also not forget that the bye weeks start in Week 4, and they're going to go on for a long time here. And because those bye weeks are coming up, maybe you need to check out who you're starting, when his bye week is, and who has a good matchup during the bye week, and then go and seek out your quarterback. So if Dalton, for example, has a good matchup on the bye week where Aaron Rodgers is out, that's the guy you should aim for, whereas Christian Ponder might be this wonderful quarterback, but if you're never sitting your starter, whether it's Rodgers or Breeze or whoever you have, and you just know you're going to stick with that starter, maybe it's RG3, then why go and get Ponder unless you're really going to trade him off later, which is something you could do, but it's also a guy that you're never going to start unless the matchup during the bye week is good.
I'm going to read some tweets here because we want to know who you should be dropping. You want to know who you should be dropping here. And Angelo on Twitter says, I have Vic and Cutler. Do I drop Cutler for Dalton, Palmer, Ponder, Locker, or Alex Smith?
All but Smith.
All but Smith for sure.
Here's another
I'd say
one.
Carson Palmer right off the gate, yes.
Brent says, I'm stuck with Cutler. Do I drop him for basically the same people?
Yeah.
All right, well, pick one.
Colors on the cut list.
Fitzpatrick, Palmer, Dalton, Ponder.
Yes.
No, pick one. He's not going to pick up all 4.
I'd roll with Ponder right now.
I go Fitzpatrick for this week. Palmer would be a little bit higher if Darius Hayward-Bay was playing.
And Nathan?
I'm going to go with Carson Palmer. They're going to have to throw the football a ton there. They're getting quarterbacks off the street. They can't stop anybody. Ben Roethlisberger had maybe the best game he's ever had throwing the football, 4 touchdowns, nearly 400 yards in that one. So I think they're going to have to put the ball in the air quite a bit, so I like Carson Palmer.
Yeah, I'm looking for a starter long-term here. That's why I'm saying Ponder. I think I like Fitzpatrick for this week more than I like Ponder, but I think long-term Ponder will be all right.
We also got a couple of tweets about Phillip Rivers. What do you guys think about him right now? What do you advise Rivers owners?
It's ugly, and part of it's because his receiving core isn't helping him out. Robert Meacham's been invisible, and Antonio Gates is banged up, and Floyd can only do so much. Maybe the return of Ryan Matthews can help Phillip Rivers as Matthews starts to get back into the flow of things, but I'd carry 2 quarterbacks with Rivers right now and play matchups.
Yeah, I think Rivers is going to have a good game this week, though. I'm not worried about him going against the Chiefs. So if it continues, I'll go back to week 1. He was 1 touchdown away when they were in the red zone all day with Nate Kading coming away with 5 field goals. If he gets another touchdown in that game, his number looks good.
Right.
Week 2, his number was good. Week 3, he struggled. And you got to chalk that up to now the Falcons 2 weeks in a row have really shut down, what should have been good passing games in terms of San Diego and Atlanta and Denver. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. So I think I give them a little bit of credit at this point. So we'll see how he does against a bad Chiefs defense.
We're going to transition and we're going to talk about tight ends now. Which tight end should you be adding? We'll look at the most viewed tight ends. And Heath Miller, he's the number 3 tight end in fantasy. He's got 4 touchdowns in 3 games, but he's on a bye. So what do you do right now? Do you sit there? Do you carry 2 tight ends just to get Heath Miller on? What do you think, Jamie?
I think I'd wait. There's such good tight end play right now. So if you miss out on Heath Miller, while the production has been very good so far, if I was struggling with, if I had Jason Witten, then maybe I'd carry 2 tight ends. If I had Antonio Gates at this point, maybe I'd carry 2 tight ends. The only situation where I think you definitely carry 2 tight ends if it's Aaron Hernandez. Now, obviously, you'd have to carry 3 tight ends for this week, so it'd be a little bit difficult because Hernandez is out. But I think in most cases, if you have Kyle Rudolph, you're getting by with him. Dennis Pitta, you're getting by with him. Martellus Bennett, you're getting by with this guy. Greg Olsen showed some signs of life. You're getting back to consider him a starting option again. Fred Davis, same thing. So Heath Miller, I think, comes into play if you're the owner looking ahead. Looking ahead to week 5, week 6, week 7. Once they come back off their bye week and you want to carry those 2 tight ends, you could drop Chris Johnson and carry Heath Miller. I'm just kidding. but I think picking up someone in Heath Miller's regard right now, just the way that he's playing, it's not a bad situation, but I don't know how many people are going to sit. They want to carry 2 tight ends just because there are such good tight ends out there right now. And Heath Miller, while off to a good start, you don't have him for this week.
I think the choice is whether or not a fantasy owner wants to carry 2 tight ends or 2 quarterbacks on the roster, because if you carry both, you're leaving yourself thin in all the other positions that you should be loaded up on. And again, it depends on how many bench spots you have. If you have a lot of bench spots, you can afford to carry 2 quarterbacks and 3 tight ends if you want. But if you only have 5 or 6 spots, I think you can really only afford to do one or the other.
Nathan, who's the one guy on that most viewed tight ends list that you think needs to be added going into week 4?
Well, listen, Dennis Pitta leads all tight ends in targets, tied with Jimmy Graham there. Been remarkably consistent, giving you a touchdown or 60 yards every single game. So to me, he is the number 1 tight end to add. But Heath Miller's a guy to keep an eye on, especially in the touchdown-heavy league. Not for this week, as everybody pointed out, he is on a bye. But he is the leader in red zone targets and goal line targets at the tight end position, as I talked about in the tricks of the trends. And Ben Roethlisberger likes him. They're in a group, 4 touchdowns already. He and Vernon Davis together have 8 touchdowns at the tight end position. You could take any 3 receivers in the NFL. None of them add up to 8 total touchdowns this year. It's the year of the tight end.
And now I'm going to take away Pitta because he's owned in 81% of leagues, Fred Davis in 77, and Olsen in 70. We're looking at guys owned in less than 70% of leagues. It's a little bit tougher now. Who is your favorite?
Actually, it's not tougher for me.
Rudolph?
You never asked me
Kyle
my
Rudolph?
favorite. It's Kyle Rudolph in Minnesota. The guy's a monster.
Right.
You saw what he was able to do last week. 2 touchdowns there, both in the red zone. That's only going to continue. Ponder even said today, as long as people leave Rudolph open, I'm going to throw it to him. And now you're adding a deep threat in Jerome Simpson to this Minnesota offense. I think Rudolph has a good chance at 10 touchdowns this season.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's out there in a third of CBSSports.com leagues boggles my mind. Drives me crazy.
He won't be tomorrow.
He won't be tomorrow. He's a starter every single week.
But let's talk about who to drop. Jermaine Gresham.
Yep.
No, Gresham actually had a good game last
He
week.
did have a good game.
A
but
lot
that
of
was
tight ends
that.
are having good games, though. Yeah, sorry, Nathan. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say he did have a good game. I would still take a Rudolph over him, a Pitta over him. I was going to go back to for a 1-week play this week. I think Brandon Myers, who has caught all 15 of his targets this year against the Denver team that has allowed every single tight end they have faced to score against them, is a nice little sleeper. Especially with Hayward Bay out, you got to think Palmer's going to lean on Denarius, and he's going to lean on Myers as well.
The one thing about Myers, he left the game with a concussion, so we got to see if he's okay. If he is, I agree with Nathan.
Yeah, I do too.
Last question. Do we drop Jason Witten? Nathan, I'll start with you.
I'll tell you what, I'll drop him faster than my chin hair in January right now.
Yeah.
He is not catching the football. That's the problem. You're talking about Jason Witten. I wouldn't cut him. I'd put him on the bench, though. But you're talking about a guy in Jason Witten who, for his career, catches about 70% of his targets, averages about 8 yards per target. So far this year, he's catching 37% of them, averaging 4 yards a target, and uncharacteristic 4 or 5 drops, depending on your counts, over the last 2 weeks alone. He's just not getting it done. And maybe it's the spleen injury. I don't know if the spleen bone's connected to the hand bone, but apparently he's having issues catching the football.
I think you got to drop him at this point.
Oh, yeah.
They're just because, again, now you're talking about when we get to bye weeks and with injury stuff creeping up, to carry 3 tight ends potentially, because if you're going to carry 2 and then you need another replacement, it's just not a situation. I think let somebody else pick him up and deal with him as the season goes on, because I do think, as Nathan said, that the spleen injury is probably in his head. It's probably going to weigh on him all season. And until you start to see consistent play, like, we had this discussion on our podcast, can you trade Jason Witten once he has a good game? Nobody's going to take him off your hands.
Right.
How many good games did he have last year?
The touchdowns, yeah. He had the one good year with the touchdowns in the last 3,
Right.
2010.
And last year he was kind of
really
missing. It's done. It's over. There are too many other good tight ends out there.
Too many good tight ends. Jason Witten, you are droppable. We'll come back. We'll tell you about running backs and wide receivers. This is Fantasy Football Today.